I don't know why I'm making this video. I mean, I do. I just don't know why it had to happen. I don't even make vlogs, and I'm not even a YouTuber. It saddens me that I even had to make this video in the first place, but oh well. Here goes. None of you know me. My name is Xiaoran Li. I'm quite literally a nobody. Just a writer. No agent or representative. Who's been doing his best to keep up to date with the current situation regarding the WGA strikes. I mostly get my information on YouTube news channels, just to see what members and representatives are saying about the current situation and how outlets are presenting them to the public. And then I came across this video by some YouTube channel called Disparu. Disparu? 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 Also, as a disclaimer, please note I may use he and you interchangeably, as this video is somewhat a direct response to his video, so I am, in some sense, also addressing Disparu himself. Now, I have no idea who this man is, or why he's even talking about the strikes in the first place. But from the get-go, I realized right away that he clearly has no idea what any of this is about, and how it affects writers. He starts off the video saying that Hollywood writers are overblown and overpaid, and that it's ridiculous for them to demand any sort of pay raise when they write unprofitable shows like Velma, fresh off the content mill. Like, that's some indication that writing is dead and that writers should just give up on their dreams.
Because when you look at their past output for something like Rings of Power, She-Hulk, The Witcher Blood Origin, or Velma, the last thing on my mind is that these people need a pay rise. And yet that is exactly what's happening.
However, if he took a second to do a simple Google search for the team behind Velma, he'd quickly realize that some of the writers for Velma were also previous writers for The Office. The US one, not the UK one. Sorry, England. A show that has gone on to win multiple Emmys. You mean to tell me that those writers ought to defend themselves in front of producers and networks after one failed project, despite having accolades already in their repertoire? It's ludicrous of you to think that just because a writer made one flop, they should immediately be thrown to the wolves and left to fend for themselves. To say that they should be allowed to negotiate their own salary in an industry that repeatedly rewards companies for grift is like throwing a giant middle finger on the writing community as a whole.
Producers have been holding the last payment, which was the second half, until they got the drafts done, so in other words, until they completed the work to the satisfaction of the company. This is a very normal practice for contractors, that you actually have to make the customer happy with your work before they give you the second payment.
You make the claim that, while not explicitly stated in the video, heavily implies that writers under WGA are contractors and not employees, which is exactly the mentality that the WGA is arguing against, as it treats them as gig economy workers, which they are not.
And the requests get crazier the more you go down, such as a minimum staffing level of 6 writers. Doesn't matter whether a project only actually requires 1 writer to make it. No, now you're forced to hire 6 people, which will inevitably water down all of their wages.
Throughout the video, you posit the notion that a minimum staffing of 6 writers is ridiculous because it will water down wages when a story can survive off of the grit of a single writer alone. Never mind the fact that serialized shows release on a weekly basis, or at least they used to be until the streaming platform took over. And now, writers are expected to have a complete 8-episode story done weeks in advance before shooting even begins, final draft and all. And that's being generous. Often the case is that a premise is created in a mini-room, and writers have to figure out where the plot goes after the pilot is written out. Not to mention the amount of rewrites that need to happen. They'd be lucky just to even see a set. Please, continue to explain to me how one writer can do all of that and negotiate their own salary at the same time.
With a great sign in the back there, we're taking our yacht back, bozos. Truly showing that creative talent that Hollywood desperately needs back in the office. In fact, that was far from the only sign, and these are Hollywood writers. This is the massive, creative, collective intellect of one of the most significant entertainment industries in the West.
He then goes on to make strawman arguments, claiming that the writings on picket signs are somehow indicative of a writer's ability to not only write, but also produce a show. Also, you cite BuzzFeed. Really scraping the bottom of the barrel there, aren't you?
It's safe to assume these two are comedy writers. Can we make this contract more accessible to a wider audience? You do realize that that's become a cliched meme that literally means what you're creating is going to be trash, right? And this is what—
Clearly, he's not a writer, as he failed to see the irony in the fact that this picket sign is taking a jab at how shit the company's counters have been. That they're basically trash. I don't have the time nor the bandwidth to thoroughly explain irony to you.
And throughout all of this, you have the timing involved. You could have done this at any time, during the streaming gold rush, but instead, you decided to do it during the streaming collapse, at a time during an economic downturn where companies are firing thousands of employees. You decide that now is the time to ask for more money, and not just ask for more money, at a time when companies are realizing that streaming actually isn't that profitable at all. It's certainly not as profitable as making movies.
Another statement that Asparo claims is that the WGA picked a poor time to start striking, as if there was a best time to start picketing, and demanding money at a time when companies are realizing streaming isn't profitable at all. Then kindly explain to me, why is David Zaslav reporting a $50 million profit in its first quarter? Terry Colby wannabe twat.
Which is why properties are being cancelled and employees are getting axed, and you choose that moment to ask for massive pay rises.
He then goes on to explain that employees are getting axed because its properties are no longer profitable. Oh, is that why they're getting axed? And it certainly doesn't have anything to do with the executives wanting the lion's share for themselves. Riddle me this. Why is the first response to properties being cancelled to lay off workers instead of redistributing the wealth so that the workers can actually make profitable properties?
And don't get me wrong, I am not against scriptwriters getting paid more. I just want individuals to get paid what they deserve. So good scriptwriters should definitely get paid more, and trash scriptwriters shouldn't. And they certainly shouldn't get subsidized at the cost of the actual quality scriptwriters having to take a pay cut just so talentless hacks can get paid money they don't deserve.
He tries to save himself a little by trying to make it look like he's on the side of writers, but he's quietly masking the ideology that they should be paid like gig writers, and that if you're a great writer, you deserve your wealth. If you're a bad writer, go fuck yourself. What happens if that same great writer would later go on to write something you dislike? Do they suddenly deserve to be treated less? Let's take an example of a fantastic writer like Aaron Sorkin. Since you're going to use Rotten Tomatoes as your basis of what merits good and bad shows, then let's have a look at some of Sorkin's works. A Few Good Men, 84%. The Social Network, 96%. The Trial of the Chicago 7, 89%. The West Wing, 96%. The Newsroom, 48%. What's this? Is that a low score I see? Does this mean that Aaron Sorkin isn't as great of a writer as we thought he was? Should he then be forced to renegotiate his salaries to the network executives, since it's rather obvious he is a hack? Payment should be fair, meaning that even if a property like Velma has low viewership, the profits it does make should be redistributed accordingly among the cast and crew. That includes the writers, as someone did demand it, and the writers undoubtedly still worked for it.
At comedy shows, you've got your comedian presenters who, they can't even write their own script. I don't even have a script for these videos. I turn my camera on and start talking. That's probably why there's so many cuts. But everything I say is off the cuff. I don't need a writer to write something for me. And nor should they. If any of these people actually have any talent, they should have been able to continue the show, and yet they couldn't. It's interesting, isn't it? Enough to bear in mind that these are shows which most people don't even find funny in the first place. So if that's with the scriptwriters, just imagine how unfunny they are on their own.
Desparo goes on to take a swing, and a miss, at late night TV. Reciting something unscripted and off the cuff doesn't make you any better of a presenter. You present yourself to an invisible audience. These people have live audiences. I mean, I wrote this whole thing down. Yes, even this part that I'm saying to the camera right now is scripted, but I had to. Because I needed to organize my thoughts in order to refute all of your baseless accusations. And that's what you're missing from your statements against late night shows. The whole premise of them is that they are a review of current events. Nobody wants to hear a disorganized mess of current events. That's why they have writers there. To structure their opening monologues before the main event. In fact, if you've never seen a single episode of any late night show, and evidently from your video you haven't, you'd immediately realize that when a host has guests over, none of that shit is scripted. It's an off-the-cuff interview that is built on the personality and rapport the host has with the guest. You'd later go on to cite the difference between film writer and TV writer pay as a means of devaluing the writers. But take a look at this. You see this little spike here? You know what happened around this time? That's right, the 2007 and 2008 strike. You know what else came out around this time? Breaking Bad. That's right. If it wasn't for the strike, you wouldn't have amazing shows like this. And Vince Gilligan, the creator of the show, is a WGA member. There's a big argument to be made whether or not Vince is solely responsible for this sudden shift in demand from film into TV, but I'm not the right person to be making that argument. Around 2008 to 2012, we had shows like Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, and Mad Men. Streaming was starting to boom around this period as well, something you did point out, and that gave a rise in the demand for more TV shows to be produced, thus an increase in the payment of writers and an increase in the supply of screenwriters as a whole. Also, around this time was the nascent superhero film franchise. There wasn't a whole lot of room for filmmakers to have their spec scripts be produced. Companies began to lean heavily on these franchises, turning them into their cash cow, hiring specific directors for titles and signing them on decades-long contracts. The streaming wars in superhero movies paved the way for massive conglomerates to form. It's why we have so many bundles under Disney+. It's why Warner Brothers partnered with Discovery. And these big suit execs making inequitable decisions is why the WGA is striking.
To stop the streamers and the studios from turning writing into a gig job. They're trying to take away our jobs and employ us for 1 day a week like we're Uber drivers. We're fighting for fairness. Firstly, I don't know why you think there's anything wrong with Uber drivers.
To be fair, the gig economy does leave a lot to be desired. While there's nothing wrong with being an Uber driver, there is something deeply troubling about the fact that people have turned to things like Uber just to make ends meet. Uber is a company that prides itself on maintaining that their workers are all independent contractors, just so they can get away with not having to pay them a stable salary, provide them with health benefits, or compensate them for any future potential damages that may occur to the driver or their vehicle. Uber absolves themselves of any liability through their business model, and major networks cannot be allowed to operate in the same manner. If you hire a writer onto a project, you better damn well sure they're compensated fair union wages.
Extra writers and no jobs for them. This is why people are only getting 1 day of work a week. That's all there is. And you cannot, in a private business which is supposed to be making money, force companies to employ people for absolutely no reason when there isn't a job for them. You cannot get them to guarantee work for projects that simply do not need it.
I think you're trying to say projects here. Writer is the job, but the project is on a per studio basis. And I think that's an asinine take, because hundreds of thousands of scripts get submitted to studios every week. To say that there is a lack of projects is baffling to me. Company executives just don't want to take a chance on spec scripts because they like to bank on what they deem as safe. They don't take chances because they think following market trends is the best course of action for the company. I can't blame them for choosing that. But simultaneously, I don't expect a network executive that has little to no experience being on a set or in writing to know what I want to watch. And of course I don't. Millions of viewers means millions of individual tastes. But every network could potentially be sitting on a goldmine of unproduced scripts, and they refuse to produce some of them on the off chance that it might hurt their bottom line, completely glossing over the fact that their pre-existing IP and reboots are already doing that in spades. All the while they hoard the wealth they generated from streaming profits, leaving writers in the dust.
AI is something the Writers Guild are very worried about themselves. In their own demands, they said, we want to regulate the use of artificial intelligence, to the point where AI can't write or rewrite literary material, and it can't be used as a source material, nor can MBA-covered material be used to train AI, to which this was just rejected.
The argument against AI is to protect future writers, like me, trying to enter the industry. My personal belief is that AI should be a tool that works in favor for the writers, that allow for more streamlined projects. AI could be used to speed up rewrites, but it should not be at the cost of replacing the writers altogether. Hence, why the call for regulation? Companies should not be the ones regulating what AI can and cannot do for their projects. I can go on a whole tangent about AI being an awful decision for coming up with an idea for a show or writing a script for one, because AI does not have a literary voice that writers often have. What they have are pattern recognition capabilities, but those patterns remove nuance, And those nuances are what allow a project to go from good to great.
Or what you do is raise their cost basis, which makes them even more likely to want to use AI. We're not just shooting ourselves in the foot here, we're going the whole hog.
There is literally no reason to raise a cost basis for a project. Executives could just as easily redistribute a small percentile of their profits down to the writers without denting their wallets, and even still make big returns on their investment, even if the project were to tank.
You just want your members to have work so they won't moan. To stop saying things like the amount of time we have to work has shrunk to the point where we're only working 6, 10, or maybe 12 weeks in a year, and you can't piece together a sustainable living doing that. Now, normally what you do if you have a part-time job is you get a second part-time job, but considering the comments about Uber drivers, they probably look down on that idea themselves.
You completely skim over the part where you call writing a part-time job, as if it's not somebody's livelihood you're talking about. Cute.
And you know what? I may have more sympathy if the writers hadn't spent years destroying properties from my childhood.
You blame the writers for destroying properties from your childhood, as though it wasn't a network executive's decision to create a reboot because it's what's familiar to an audience, and as we know, companies bank on that sweet, sweet nostalgia. And then you mentioned that Wednesday is a very successful retelling of a pre-existing IP. So, which is it, Disparu? Are writers ruining properties, or are they making good shows?
What you are doing is taking entertainment away from the customers that you want to keep on your side. And it's not their job to care about you, it's not their job to worry about your wages. All they see, or all they have to see, is that you are taking away their entertainment.
I like that you treat customers/viewers akin to mindless beings that consume media without a thought for who produces them. Even if that is the casual or general viewers, getting them to care about the well-being of writers only works in their benefit, because ultimately that's what is going to garner them the quality shows that they're looking for.
Because what you've got is the WGA negotiating minimums, but what they're actually negotiating is a fee. Without the guild, each individual would approach the company and negotiate their own pay based off their own merit and skill and experience and actual quality of work. But when you do this with a guild, you're subservient. You give them your negotiation power, and they, on behalf...
You argue that the guild is harmful, as it takes away the individual's right to bargain for their own worth. It takes away their negotiating power. What you fail to address is that the guild negotiates for more than just a person's salary. They negotiate schedules, accommodation, traveling expenses, healthcare benefits, and other amenities that an individual on their own might otherwise not know how to negotiate or even realize that they could negotiate for.
That's far better than employing someone to sit in a room where they're simply not needed, simply because a guild forced them to be there for arbitrary reasons.
What do you mean forces them to be there? Every member that's ever been part of the guild has signed up voluntarily. You clearly don't know what the requirements are to even be a part of the guild. There's a $2,500 initiation fee and a requirement of at least 24 units in order to be eligible. No one just willingly throws away $2,500 because they don't want to be there. This video is getting pretty long, so I'm going to wrap it up here and just point out that Disparu has a very narrow perception of how unions work, thinking that the weakest of us drags us all down, therefore we must cull the weak, instead of the strongest of us must uplift the weaker ones so that we all rise to the top instead of getting there alone. No one person is better just because they achieved something alone. When I first viewed Disparu's channel, it quickly came to my attention that they're actually a parasitic drama channel. They profit off of shows that have bad writing, so of course they're going to post a video that, on the surface, looks like they're anti-union, which, I mean, yes, they clearly are. But underneath, they're really just pro-shit shows. Of course they're going to want bad writings to be the norm, otherwise they don't have content to generate their precious views. I mean, just look at his About tab. The worse the entertainment is, the better entertainment can be created from it. This video was a bait for his benefit. Disparu was intentionally spreading misinformation about a cause he knows little to almost nothing about. As of filming this, his video has gained 80,000 views, and that's remarkably dangerous because it means at least 80,000 people have been fed his word salad. Please watch out for channels like this, and if you are one of the few viewers that finds themselves accidentally caught in this spider's web of lies, the quickest way to get out is to simply report the video for spreading misinformation and move on. Or you can be like me and do a bit of research to see just where this person is coming from and then film a whole video about it. If you want to actually do something helpful, don't subscribe to my channel. I don't post shit on here. Instead, find some way that you can contribute to help the WGA employees that are fighting for fair wages. If you're unable to do that, either out of proximity or you just can't be asked, The very least you can do is to share this video with others so that they can be made aware and avoid videos like Disparu's.